Well, we're going to wrap up our sermon series on choices for a new year. You can remember the new year. It wasn't actually that long ago. You may be able to remember our first Sunday in this series. We talked about choosing life over death, and we talked about how this rather astounding statistic that says that 1/2 of all mainline churches within the next 50 years are expected, anticipated to close unless we do a radical intervention and choose life over death. The second week of our series, we talked about choosing community over isolation and the need for churches and individuals also to connect in community to those surrounding us and form those caring circles. The third week of this series, we talked about choosing fun over drudgery, and we talked about the prodigal brother who wouldn't come to the party. In our fourth sermon, we talked about choosing bold over mild, and we looked at Proverbs 28:19, which says that the righteous are bold, right, like a lion. And then, of course, we had a snow day, and y'all went home and, had hot chocolate, well deserved. And then last week, we talked about choosing the frontier over the fortress mentality. We talked about reaching out and going out into the world, going to where people were, not demanding that they come to us. Today we come to our final choice, which is choosing now rather than later. Aaron has our first reading from the book of Acts, chapter 16, verses 9 through 10. This happens during Paul's second missionary journey. Aaron?
During the night, Paul had a vision. There stood a man of Macedonia pleading with him and saying, "Come over to Macedonia and help us." When he had seen the vision, he immediately tried to cross over to Macedonia, being convinced that God had called us to proclaim the good news to them.
Thank you, Aaron. And then from 2 Corinthians chapter 6. As we work together with him, that is Christ, we urge you also not to accept the grace of God in vain. For God says, "At an acceptable time I have listened to you, and on the day of salvation I have helped you." Behold, now is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. We've spoken frankly to you, Corinthians. Our hearts are wide open to you. There is no restriction in our affection, but only in yours. In return, and I speak now as to children, open your hearts wide also. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Well, there's a true story about a guy who goes to the house where he grew up and lived until he was about 20 years old, and he had moved out as a young adult. He'd gone back to his old neighborhood, and he was walking around, and he came to his old house, and so he knocked on the front door and asked the people if he might be able to wander around and see what the house still looked like. And as he was wandering around, it struck him suddenly like a lightning bolt that somehow he may have left some stuff in the attic. And so he talked to the people and said, I think I might have left some stuff in the attic. And they said, well, we haven't been in the attic ever. And so he said, could I go in there? And they indeed said, sure, go on ahead. Sure enough, he got up there in the attic, and there in the attic was one of his old jackets. He tried it on, still fit, reached in the pocket, and there was a receipt from a shoe store in which he had dropped off some shoes some 20 years ago and completely forgotten about it. So on a lark, the man decides to go to the shoe store just for fun. So he takes out the receipt and he hands it to the guy behind the counter. And he says, are my shoes ready yet? So the guy goes back and he kind of rumbles around in the back room, and there's all this knocking noise and all of this stuff. And then the guy comes out and he says, come back a week from Thursday and we'll have them ready for you. True story. Now is the day of salvation, says Paul. Not a week from Thursday. And yet we all know the temptation of a week from Thursday, right? We'll do it when we get around to it, as Sherry said with our kiddos. Be honest here, how many of you struggle with procrastination? Raise your hand if you struggle with that. I know I do. I came across recently the Procrastinator's Creed. See if you can relate to any of these. Number 1, I believe that if anything is worth doing, it should have already been done. Number 2, I shall never move more quickly except to avoid more work or find excuses. Number 3, I will never rush into a job until I've had a lifetime of consideration. Number 4, I shall meet all of my deadlines exactly in proportion to the amount of bodily injury that I could expect if I missed them. And last but not least, I will never put off till tomorrow what I can forget about forever. Procrastination. Churches, of course, can be procrastinators also. Church consultant Paul Nixon has compiled the top excuses that churches use in not doing the work that God is calling them to do. Number 1, he says on that list, is we need to do a better job of caring for our current members before we go out and try to get some new members. Number 2, he says, we don't have enough workers for things that we're already doing. Why should we be doing new things? Number 3, we don't have enough money. Number 4, we've got to wait until Mr. or Mrs. Smith goes to their great reward because he or she would not be pleased with the change that we are contemplating. And so on and so forth. There are thousands of excuses, both personally and corporately, as to why we should choose later rather than now. And indeed, many of these excuses do have a grain of truth that must be dealt with. Waiting to adequately prepare for action, for instance, which in a sense isn't waiting at all, but rather preparing, well, that may well be a wise course of action. That's understandable. And committing to study an issue before acting upon something, that can be a wise course of action also. And yet, human nature being what it is, 90% of the time, when we choose to do something later, let's be honest, we're choosing not to do anything, aren't we? Dennis Waitley, in his book, Being the Best, says this. He says, when you stop to think about it, there is no such thing as a future decision. We face only present decisions that will affect what will happen in the future. Procrastinators, he says, wait for just the right moment to decide. But if we wait for the perfect moment, then we risk becoming security seekers who are running in place, going through the motions, and getting deeper and deeper into a rut. If we wait for every objection to be overcome, he says, we will attempt nothing in our lives. One of my favorite musicals is The Music Man. Any of you seen The Music Man? It's a classic. In one scene, Harold Hill, the music man, tries to convince Marion, the librarian, to go out with him. He suggests that they should meet by the footbridge in the park that evening. She wants to go, but she puts him off. Please, she says, some other time, maybe tomorrow. Hill replies, pile up enough tomorrows, and you'll find that you've collected nothing but a lot of empty yesterdays. Pile up enough tomorrows, and you'll discover that you've piled up a lot of empty yesterdays. None of us wants to end up that way, I know. says, we are now faced with the fact that tomorrow is today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. In this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time, he says. Life often leaves us standing there naked and dejected with only a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men and women does not remain at flood, it ebbs, says King. We may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time ignores our every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late, too late. There is an invisible book of life that faithfully records our vigilance or our neglect. Too late. What tragic words those are, aren't they? Last Palm Sunday, maybe you can remember back that far ago, last Palm Sunday, for instance, I set aside the palm branches from that service in order to burn a fresh batch for Ash Wednesday 2019, which at that time seemed like it was an eternity away. I set those branches down in a bucket right next to my van. Every time I got out of my van for 12 months, I was confronted with that bucket full of palm branches. And I thought, I really ought to burn those palm branches really quickly here. But then again, I thought, don't worry about it, don't worry about it. I've got plenty of time. I'll burn them when the weather's nicer. I'll burn them in 2019 during Lent. Lent, after all, in 2019 is starting really late. It's something like March. I'll just burn them one really nice day in March of 2019. Yeah. Well, it's not quite too late. I'm going to be burning them, but I'm going to tell you it's going to be about 16 degrees outside on Tuesday, and I'm going to be huddled around that grill praying for dear life that those branches ignite quickly and turn to ash. We think we can count on tomorrow, don't we? Right? Tomorrow's a fickle thing, isn't it? On a more serious note, I borrowed some tools from Jerry Keister in October. As I was thanking him profusely while returning them, he said, there is one thing that you could do for me to repay me. He said, I would really enjoy a 6-pack of that homebrew beer that you're making. And I thought to myself, this is fantastic. This is wonderful. I've been trying to connect with Jerry, trying to make a connection with him, and this will be an easy way to work in a visit and sit down, and he and I can enjoy a nice, cold homebrew. And so I happily agreed. But then I said, there is one little problem, and that is, I said, I am all out of my last batch of beer. My wife had drunk it all. Not to fear, though, I said I'm going to brew another batch this Christmas, and I'll bring you, as soon as that beer is aged, I'll bring you a 6-pack and we'll sit down together. Well, I got the batch brewed, and it was done aging about a month ago. But then, we all know, Jim passed away, and there was a funeral that we had to do, and preparations, and there was a lot of family things that I had to do, and well, I just forgot about it. Sad truth. And now, it's too late. I procrastinated, and now I'll never share that fear with Jerry, at least on this side of eternity. Too late. Don't wait until it's too late, friends. Do it today. We are confronted with the fierce urgency of now. And Paul says the same thing in his letter to the bickering Corinthians. Now, he says, is the acceptable time. Now is the day of salvation. This is the day to act, dear friends, not a week from Thursday. And those weren't just words to the Apostle Paul. He lived those words out in Acts 16 that Aaron read for us. Paul has this vision of a man in Macedonia pleading with him to come over and help him. And what does the text say that he and his companions did? It says they immediately went over to Macedonia and preached to them. Paul had a vision. He felt the fierce urgency of now, and he acted upon it. How about you? How about me? Do you feel the fierce urgency of now, of this moment, of this day, this moment in history? Do we feel it as a congregation? I've said it before, and I will say it again. I believe that St. Paul is at a crossroads, and the vision that we cast after worship today will go a long way towards determining whether future generations of Presbyterians and others in the community of Johnston and the surrounding area will call us neglectful or vigilant, too late, or just in time. And how might this apply to us personally, individually? Is there something in your life that you just know that God has been calling you to do, but you just keep putting it off? Is there a person, for instance, in your life that you need to ask forgiveness of, but your pride has been holding you back? Or is there a loved one that you need to say those three most vital words, I love you, to? But maybe you're afraid of appearing a fool. Or is there some other vitally important task, perhaps for your family, perhaps in your job, perhaps in the church? Is there some other vitally important task that you know you should be doing, but you aren't doing it? I want to give you just a few moments right now to ponder that one thing in your life that you know that God is calling you to do, but you aren't doing it. You got that thing fixed in your mind right now? It's probably the first thing that popped in your mind. Don't ignore it. It's the first one. Now, I want to take just a moment right now for you to pray and to ask God to give you the strength and the courage to do that one thing that you know God is asking you to do. Satan once called the emissaries of hell to himself and told them that he wanted to send one of them out to do as much damage to the cause of Christ as was possible. And so he asked all of the emissaries in hell which one wanted to go. And so one of the demons came forward and said, I'll go. All right, said Satan. He said, if I send you, what will you tell the mortals below? The demon said, I will tell them that there is no heaven. But Satan replied, well, they won't believe you because the earth is too full of God's glory for anyone to believe that all that beauty is an accident. You're not the right one for this job, he said. And so another demon rather, came forward, darker and fouler than the first, and he said, I know what I will tell them. He said, I will tell them there's no such a thing as hell. And Satan looked at him and said, you know, they're not going to believe you either, for earth is too full of evil for people to believe that there is no greater force behind it all. You're not the right one for this job either. And then one last creature came forward, more foul, more disgusting than any of the other demons in all of hell. And Satan said to him, if I send you, what will your message be to the mortals below? So that we can destroy their souls. And the demon said, I will tell them that there is no hurry. And Satan said, go! Don't believe the devil, friends. This is the day that the Lord has made. Now is the day of salvation. Not a week from Thursday, not tomorrow, but today. Don't wait until it's too late. Let's pray. Gracious God, as we come to this table, we ask that you might impress upon us the fierce urgency of now. This indeed is the day of salvation. This indeed is the bread of heaven. This indeed is your grace and your mercy poured out for us. And this indeed is your call upon our lives, your call to gratitude, your call to response. So Lord, help us to drink deeply and to take in deeply your grace and your mercy, your courage and your strength, so that we might not put off that which you are calling us to do individually or together as the family of St. Paul